The single gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Sweetwater Creek, Texas, as Penelope Crawford clutched her bleeding arm and ran for her life. The year was 1876, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her 22 years, trusting a man who promised her the world but delivered only betrayal. The setting sun cast long shadows as she stumbled into town, her once fine blue dress torn and stained with blood and dirt. She needed to disappear, to become invisible among the Saturday evening crowd gathering for the weekly social at the town hall. Penelope slipped through the throng of ranchers, merchants, and their families, her eyes darting nervously. Her long auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in wild tangles around her pale face. She had come west with dreams of adventure and independence, but now all she wanted was escape. Just blend in, she whispered to herself, edging toward the back of the gathering. Become nobody. The wound on her arm burned fiercely, but she dared not seek help. Victor Holloway would be looking for her by now, and the gold pocket watch hidden in her boot would ensure a hangman's noose if she were caught. She hadn't meant to steal it, she'd only grabbed what she could in her desperate flight from his ranch, but explaining that to a judge wouldn't matter much now. The crowd parted momentarily, and Penelope caught sight of a tall figure scanning the faces in the room. Her heart nearly stopped. He wasn't Victor, but something about the way he moved, confident, deliberate, told her he was searching for someone. For her, Luke Donovan had been tracking the Holloway gang for 3 months. As a Texas Ranger, he'd followed their trail of robberies across 4 counties, and tonight's information about a woman fleeing Holloway's ranch might be the break he needed. The description was vague: young woman, auburn hair, possibly injured, but in a town this size, strangers stood out. His eyes swept the crowd until they locked on a woman trying to make herself smaller against the far wall. Even from across the room, he could see the fear in her eyes and the way she clutched her arm. He moved toward her with purpose, watching as panic flashed across her face. She turned to flee, but the crowd had grown too thick. When he reached her, she was trembling, eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered, "I'm nobody. Just let me be." Luke leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Not to me, you don't." Penelope's knees nearly buckled. "I don't know what you mean. You're running from Victor Holloway," he stated matter-of-factly. "And you're hurt," her face drained of color. "Are you one of his men?" Luke shook his head and discreetly showed her his ranger badge. "I'm looking to put him behind bars." "You might be able to help me do that." Relief flooded through Penelope, quickly followed by suspicion. "How do I know I can trust you?" "You don't," he admitted. "But that arm needs tending, and you need somewhere safe to hide. I can provide both." The room suddenly buzzed with commotion as 3 rough-looking men burst through the doors. Penelope recognized them immediately: Victor's henchmen. "Time's up for deciding, madam," Luke said, gently taking her uninjured arm. "Come with me now, or take your chances with them." Without another word, he guided her toward a side door, his body shielding her from view. They slipped out into the cool night air, and Luke led her quickly down an alley toward a modest boarding house at the edge of town. "I have a room here," he explained, leading her up the back stairs. "You'll be safe for tonight." Inside his room, Luke lit a lamp and gestured for Penelope to sit on the single chair. He retrieved a medical kit from his saddlebag and knelt before her. "May I?" he asked, indicating her injured arm. Penelope hesitated, then slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing a bloody gash where a bullet had grazed her. "He shot you." Luke's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened. "He didn't mean to hit me," Penelope said softly. "He was aiming for my heart." Luke cleaned the wound carefully, his touch gentler than his weathered hands suggested. "What's your name?" "Penelope Crawford. Most people call me Penny." "Luke Donovan." He wrapped a clean bandage around her arm. "Now, Miss Crawford, I think it's time you told me how you came to be running from one of the most dangerous men in Texas." Penelope took a shaky breath. "I was a schoolteacher in Boston. My parents died last year, and I answered an advertisement for teachers needed in Texas. Victor was on the school board that hired me. He was charming, wealthy. I was naive. He has that effect on people, Luke said grimly. Go on. After a few months, he began courting me. I was flattered. Then he asked me to marry him, and I accepted. Her voice grew bitter. It wasn't until I moved to his ranch that I learned the truth. The school position was just a ruse to bring respectable women west. Victor Holloway isn't a rancher, he's a thief and a murderer. Luke nodded. We've been after him for years, but he's careful and well-connected. I discovered his real business by accident. There was a locked room in the house. I found a key and... She shuddered. There were ledgers, stolen goods, plans for robberies. When Victor caught me, he locked me in that room, said he'd decide what to do with me in the morning. I knew what that meant. How did you escape? One of the ranch hands, Miguel, he helped me. Victor had beaten his brother nearly to death over a missing horse. Miguel unlocked the door and gave me a head start. Her eyes filled with tears. Victor caught us. He shot Miguel, then came after me. I ran with nothing but the clothes on my back and... She hesitated. And, Luke prompted, Penelope reached down and pulled a gold pocket watch from her boot. I grabbed this. I don't know why I was panicked, but it has names and dates engraved inside. I think they might be records of his robberies. Luke took the watch carefully, opening it to reveal tiny engravings along the inner case. His eyes widened. Miss Crawford, this is evidence we've been seeking for months. A noise outside the window made them both freeze. Luke quickly extinguished the lamp and moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. Victor's men, he whispered. They're searching the boarding houses. Penelope's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. What do we do? Luke grabbed his saddlebag and gun belt. We leave, now. Is there somewhere you can go? Family, friends? She shook her head. No one. I'm alone here. Something in her voice, the raw vulnerability, made Luke pause. He'd been a ranger for 8 years, had seen the worst of humanity, had learned to keep his distance from those he was sworn to protect. But something about Penelope Crawford broke through his carefully constructed walls. Then you'll come with me, he decided. I have a cabin about 20 miles north of here. We can hide there while I figure out how to use this evidence against Holloway. Why would you help me? Penelope asked, searching his face. Luke's expression softened slightly. Because it's my job to protect innocent people, and because I've been chasing Holloway for too long to let this opportunity slip away. They slipped out through the back door of the boarding house just as Victor's men entered through the front. Luke led Penelope to the livery stable where his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding, was kept. Can you ride? He asked, saddling the horse quickly. Yes, she nodded. My father taught me. Luke helped her up, then mounted behind her. Hold tight, he murmured, and urged the horse into a gallop. They rode hard through the night, the rhythm of hoofbeats matching Penelope's racing heart. She was acutely aware of Luke's strong arms on either side of her, holding the reins, and the solid warmth of his chest against her back. For the first time since discovering Victor's true nature, she felt safe. As dawn broke over the Texas landscape, Luke finally slowed their pace. They'd crossed a river and ridden through dense woods, taking a circuitous route to throw off any pursuers. Almost there, he said, his voice rough from the night's ride. Penelope nodded, too exhausted to speak. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, leaving her light-headed and weak. Luke's cabin was nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by pine trees and protected by a rocky ridge to the north. It was simple but solid, a one-room structure with a stone chimney and a small porch. It's not much, Luke said as he helped her down from the horse, but it's secure. Not many people know about this place. Penelope stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground, her legs numb from the long ride. Luke caught her arm to steady her, and for a moment they stood close, his hazel eyes searching her face with concern. You're exhausted, he observed. Let's get you inside. The cabin was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchenette area, and a bed in the corner. Luke immediately set about building a fire while Penelope stood awkwardly in the center of the room. You should rest, Luke said, nodding toward the bed. I'll keep watch outside. I couldn't take your bed, she protested. You're injured and exhausted, please. His tone brooked no argument. Too tired to protest further, Penelope sank onto the bed. The simple act of removing her boots felt monumental. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Luke draping a quilt over her shoulders and the gentle warmth of the fire beginning to chase away the chill. When she awoke, the sun was high in the sky. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: Victor's rage, Miguel's sacrifice, the bullet grazing her arm, the desperate ride through the night with a Texas Ranger she barely knew. Luke was sitting at the table, cleaning his revolver. He looked up as she stirred. "There's water in the basin if you'd like to wash," he said, "and I've made some coffee." Penelope nodded gratefully and made her way to the small basin in the corner. The cool water was a blessing on her face and neck, washing away some of the dust and fear of the past 24 hours. "How's your arm?" Luke asked when she joined him at the table. "Sore, but better." She accepted the cup of coffee he offered. "Thank you for everything." Luke nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "I should be thanking you. That watch you took, it contains dates and locations of at least 12 major robberies over the past 2 years. With this evidence and your testimony, we might finally be able to put Holloway away." Penelope stared into her coffee cup. "If I live long enough to testify." "You will," Luke said with quiet determination. "I give you my word." There was something in his voice, a steadiness, a certainty that made Penelope believe him. She studied him openly for the first time. Luke Donovan was not classically handsome, but his features were strong and honest. His hazel eyes, flecked with gold, held an intensity that was both intimidating and reassuring. His dark hair, slightly too long, curled at the nape of his neck, and a shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. He looked to be in his early 30s, with the weathered complexion of a man who lived his life outdoors. "How long have you been a ranger?" she asked. 8 years. Joined up after the war. You fought in the Civil War," Luke nodded. "For the Union. I was young, barely 18 when I enlisted." "Saw things no boy should see." He set down his revolver. "When it was over, I couldn't go back to farming like my father wanted. Needed to do something that mattered. And does it matter?" He met her gaze steadily. "Most days, yes." Penelope found herself wanting to know more about this quiet, capable man who had risked his life to help a stranger. But before she could ask another question, Luke stood abruptly, his hand moving to his gun. "Stay here," he commanded, moving swiftly to the window. Penelope's heart began to race again. "What is it?" "Riders, coming fast." He handed her his spare revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" She took the gun, her hand trembling slightly. "My father taught me the basics." "Good. If anything happens to me, there's a trapdoor under the bed. It leads to a small cellar and a tunnel that comes out about 100 yards into the woods. Head east, you'll reach the town of Pine Creek in about a day's walk." "You're frightening me," Penelope whispered. Luke's expression softened momentarily. "It's just a precaution, probably nothing." He moved to the door. "Stay inside, away from the windows." Penelope watched as he stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Through the window, she could see 3 riders approaching. Her fingers tightened around the revolver Luke had given her. To her surprise, Luke relaxed and raised a hand in greeting as the riders drew closer. After a brief conversation, he returned to the cabin. "Rangers," he explained. "Word about Victor shooting a woman spread quickly. They've been looking for me. Are they going to take me back to Sweetwater?" Penelope asked, alarmed. Luke shook his head. "No, I've explained the situation. They're going to continue tracking Holloway while we stay here. In a few days, when it's safer, we'll head to Austin. You can give your testimony to the district judge there." Relief flooded through Penelope. "So we wait," Luke confirmed. "I hope you don't mind being stuck in this cabin with me for a few days." "After what I've been through, this cabin feels like paradise," she admitted. Luke's lips quirked in a half-smile that transformed his serious face. "I'll remind you of that when you're eating my cooking." For the first time in what felt like forever, Penelope laughed. The sound surprised her, a reminder that despite everything, she was still alive, still capable of joy. The days that followed settled into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Luke proved to be a decent cook, preparing simple but satisfying meals from his supplies and what he could hunt. Penelope's arm healed gradually, and with it, her spirit began to recover as well. They talked during the long evenings, Luke sharing stories of his more amusing adventures as a ranger, Penelope describing her life in Boston and her journey west. She found him to be an excellent listener, thoughtful and perceptive. Despite his intimidating profession, there was a gentleness to Luke that emerged when he thought no one was watching in the way he tended to his horse, in his careful inspection of her healing wound, in the respectful distance he maintained despite the cabin's close quarters. On the third night, as they sat before the fire, Penelope finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you become a ranger, really? It can't just be because you didn't want to farm." Luke was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "My younger sister, Sarah, was killed by outlaws when I was away fighting in the war. My parents had sent her to stay with our aunt in Dallas, thinking she'd be safer there than on our isolated farm. The men who killed her were never caught." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "I joined the Rangers to make sure other families didn't suffer the same fate." Penelope's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Luke," he nodded, still staring into the flames. "It was a long time ago, but you still carry it with you." "Every day." He looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. "What about you? What made a Boston schoolteacher decide to come all the way to Texas?" Penelope sighed. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Boston. My father had debts I didn't know about. The house had to be sold to pay them off. I was alone, with no prospects and no money. The advertisement for teachers in Texas offered good pay and a fresh start." She gave a bitter laugh. "I was so excited about the adventure, so naive. You couldn't have known what Holloway was. I should have seen the signs. He was too charming, too perfect. And when things didn't add up, the strange men coming and going from the ranch at odd hours, the locked room, the conversations that stopped when I entered, I ignored my instincts." "We all make mistakes," Luke said quietly. "Some mistakes get people killed," she replied, thinking of Miguel. Luke set down his stick and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me, Penny. What happened to Miguel wasn't your fault. Victor Holloway is the only one responsible for his actions. You survived, and now you have the chance to bring Holloway to justice. That's what matters." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. No one had looked at her that way before, as if she were brave and strong, not just a foolish woman who had made a terrible mistake. "Thank you," she whispered. The air between them seemed to change, charged with something neither was ready to acknowledge. Luke cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. We should get some rest." As had become their routine, Luke took his bedroll outside to the porch, insisting Penelope take the bed. She had protested the first night, but he had been adamant about propriety. "Good night, Luke," she said softly as he headed for the door. He paused, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Good night, Penny." The next morning, Penelope awoke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She opened her eyes to find Luke already up and cooking breakfast. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Hungry?" "Starving," she admitted, coming to join him at the table. They ate in companionable silence until Luke said, "I need to ride into Pine Creek today for supplies. We're running low on a few things." Alarm flashed through Penelope. "Is it safe?" "Should be. It's a small town, not many strangers pass through, and I've been careful, took different routes when hunting, made sure we weren't followed, but I don't want to leave you alone here." "You want me to come with you?" The thought of leaving the safety of the cabin made her nervous. "Only if you feel up to it. We could disguise you a bit. I have an extra hat and coat that would hide your hair and dress." Penelope considered it. After days in the cabin, the idea of fresh air and a change of scenery was appealing, despite the risk. And the thought of being separated from Luke, even for a few hours, was strangely unsettling. "I'll come," she decided. Luke nodded, looking pleased. We'll leave in an hour. Pine Creek was even smaller than Sweetwater, just a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty main street. As they rode in, Penelope felt exposed despite the oversized coat and hat that concealed her identity. She stayed close to Luke as they tied up the horse outside the general store. "Keep your head down," Luke murmured, "and let me do the talking." Inside the store, an elderly man greeted Luke warmly. "Donovan, haven't seen you in these parts for a spell. Who's your friend?" "My cousin, visiting from back east," Luke replied smoothly. "Not used to our Texas sun, got a nasty burn the other day." The shopkeeper nodded sympathetically. "Well, welcome to Pine Creek, young man. We don't get many visitors." Penelope nodded silently, keeping her face partially hidden by the hat's wide brim. She wandered the small store while Luke gathered supplies, pausing to examine a shelf of books. It had been days since she'd read anything, and the sight of books made her realize how much she missed that simple pleasure. "See something you like?" Luke asked, coming up beside her. "I was just looking," she said quickly. Luke studied her for a moment, then reached for a slim volume of poetry. "This one any good? Tennyson? Yes, he's wonderful." Her eyes lit up despite herself. Without another word, Luke added the book to his purchases. When they left the store, Penelope clutched the paper-wrapped package to her chest, touched by the thoughtful gesture. Their next stop was the small tavern for a hot meal, a luxury after days of camp cooking. They sat at a corner table, Penelope still hiding beneath the oversized hat and coat. Luke ordered stew and bread for both of them, along with coffee. "Thank you for the book," Penelope said quietly when the server had gone. Luke shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Thought you might be getting bored with just my company." "Not at all," she assured him. "You're surprisingly good company for a man who spends so much time alone." A small smile touched his lips. "Is that a compliment, Miss Crawford?" "I believe it is, Mr. Donovan." Their eyes met, and Penelope felt a warm flutter in her chest. The moment was broken by the arrival of their food, but something had shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that had been growing over their days together. As they ate, Luke kept a watchful eye on the tavern's other patrons. Most appeared to be locals, but a group of 3 men at the bar caught his attention. "Don't look now," he said quietly, "but I think we should finish up and leave. Those men at the bar, they're not from around here." Penelope tensed. "Do you think they're Victor's men?" "Can't be sure, but I don't want to take chances." They ate quickly, and Luke paid for their meal. As they stood to leave, one of the men at the bar turned, his gaze falling on Penelope. For a terrifying moment, she thought he recognized her despite the disguise. But the man merely nodded drunkenly before turning back to his whiskey. Outside, Luke helped Penelope mount the horse, then swung up behind her. They left town at a casual pace, not wanting to draw attention, but once they were out of sight, Luke urged the horse into a gallop. "Were they following us?" Penelope asked, holding tight to the saddle horn. "Not sure," Luke replied, his voice tense, "but something didn't feel right." They rode hard for nearly an hour, taking a different route back to the cabin. The sun was beginning to set when they finally reached the clearing. Luke dismounted first, then helped Penelope down. As her feet touched the ground, a shot rang out, splintering the wood of the cabin wall just inches from where they stood. Luke reacted instantly, pushing Penelope behind him and drawing his gun in one fluid motion. "Inside," he commanded, returning fire as they ran for the cabin door. Once inside, Luke barred the door and moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. "At least 3 of them," he reported grimly. "Looks like they followed us after all." Penelope's heart hammered in her chest. "Victor's men, has to be, no one else would have tracked us here." Another shot hit the cabin wall. Luke ducked away from the window and reached for his rifle. "We're pinned down," he said. "They've got us surrounded." Penelope felt dizzy with fear. "What do we do?" Luke's expression was determined. "We hold them off until dark, then we use the tunnel under the bed." He handed her his spare revolver again. "Remember how to use this." She nodded, her hands steadier than she expected as she checked the chamber. "Stay low and away from the windows," Luke instructed. He moved to the fireplace and extinguished the small fire they'd lit earlier, plunging the cabin into shadow. For the next hour they waited in tense silence, broken only by occasional gunfire from the woods. Luke returned fire sparingly, conserving ammunition. As darkness fell, the shooting became more sporadic. "They're trying to wait us out," Luke whispered. "They know we can't stay in here forever." "What if they find the tunnel?" Penelope asked. "They won't. It's well hidden and the exit is camouflaged." He moved to her side, his face barely visible in the darkness. "Are you ready to go?" "Yes," she said, though fear made her voice tremble. Luke squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Stay close to me. No matter what happens, keep moving east like I told you before." Together, they pushed the bed aside and Luke lifted the trapdoor, revealing a dark opening in the floor. He lit a small lantern and handed it to Penelope. "I'll go first," he said. "Follow right behind me." The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing them to crouch as they moved forward. The air was damp and cool, smelling of earth and roots. Penelope tried not to think about the weight of soil above them, focusing instead on Luke's back in front of her and the small circle of light cast by the lantern. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a ladder leading up to another trapdoor. Luke extinguished the lantern and climbed up, slowly pushing open the door and peering out. "Clear," he whispered and helped Penelope up and out. They emerged in a dense thicket, completely hidden from view. The night was clear, a bright moon providing enough light to see by once their eyes adjusted. In the distance, they could see the cabin and the shadowy figures of men surrounding it. "They still think we're inside," Luke said softly. "That gives us a head start." They moved silently through the woods, heading east as planned. Luke led the way, his hand often reaching back to guide Penelope over fallen logs or through particularly dense underbrush. The night sounds of the forest owls calling, small creatures rustling in the leaves seemed unnaturally loud to Penelope's frightened ears. After nearly an hour of careful progress, a gunshot shattered the quiet, much closer than the cabin. "They've discovered we're gone," Luke said grimly. "We need to move faster." They broke into a jog, no longer trying to stay silent. Penelope's heart pounded with exertion and fear as they crashed through the underbrush. Behind them, shouts and more gunfire indicated that Victor's men were in pursuit. Suddenly, Luke stopped, holding up a hand. Ahead of them, the ground dropped away steeply into a ravine. At the bottom, a stream glittered in the moonlight. "We need to cross," Luke said. "The water will hide our tracks." The descent was treacherous, loose rocks sliding beneath their feet as they half climbed, half slid down the steep bank. Penelope lost her footing near the bottom and would have fallen if Luke hadn't caught her arm, steadying her. The stream was shallow but fast-moving, the water ice-cold as they waded across. On the other side, Luke led them downstream for several hundred yards before climbing out onto the opposite bank. "That should buy us some time," he said, helping Penelope up the slippery slope. "They'll have to search both directions when they reach the water." They continued east, moving as quickly as they dared in the darkness. Penelope was exhausted, her wet clothes heavy and cold, but the fear of capture kept her going. Luke seemed tireless, his ranger training evident in his sure-footed progress through the difficult terrain. As dawn began to lighten the sky, they reached a small ridge overlooking a valley. In the distance, they could see the faint outlines of buildings Pine Creek. "We made it," Penelope breathed, relief making her knees weak. Luke shook his head. "Not yet. We can't go into town, that's the first place they'll look for us. We need to keep moving east toward Austin." Disappointment hit her hard. "How much farther? 3 days on foot if we push hard." He studied her face with concern. "You need rest first, though." "We'll find a place to hide for a few hours." They found shelter in a small cave formed by an overhanging rock. Luke gathered branches to create a screen over the entrance while Penelope sank down on the ground, too tired to help. Her wet clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, and she shivered despite the rising temperature. "You need to get out of those wet things," Luke said, kneeling beside her with his saddlebag. "I have a spare shirt you can wear while your dress dries." He handed her the shirt and turned his back to give her privacy. Penelope changed quickly, grateful for the dry garment despite its oversized fit. Luke's shirt smelled of pine and leather, and something uniquely him, a scent she had come to associate with safety. "Thank you," she said when she was decent again. "You can turn around now." Luke's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his shirt, her damp hair loose around her shoulders, but he quickly schooled his expression. "You should try to sleep, I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," she protested. "I'm used to going without, ranger training." Too exhausted to argue, Penelope lay down on the soft earth, using Luke's rolled-up coat as a pillow. Despite her fear and discomfort, sleep claimed her almost immediately. She woke several hours later to find Luke sitting at the cave entrance, rifle across his knees, staring vigilantly into the forest. Sunlight filtered through the branches he had arranged, casting dappled patterns on the ground. "Any sign of them?" she asked, sitting up. Luke shook his head. "Nothing yet, but they're out there searching." Penelope's dress had dried in the warm air, and she retrieved it from the rock where Luke had spread it. "I should change back." Luke nodded and turned away again, giving her privacy. When she had changed, they shared a small meal from the supplies Luke had purchased in Pine Creek jerky, hard biscuits, and dried fruit. "We'll travel at dusk," Luke decided. "Less chance of being spotted." The day passed slowly, both of them tense and watchful. They spoke little, saving their energy and staying alert for any sign of pursuit. As the sun began to set, they prepared to leave their shelter. "We'll follow the ridge for as long as possible," Luke explained. "Higher ground gives us better visibility." They moved out as darkness fell, staying close to the tree line for cover while maintaining their eastward course. The night was cooler than the previous one, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves overhead. Under different circumstances, Penelope might have found the walk pleasant. As they walked, Luke told her about Austin, describing the growing city with its newly constructed Capitol building and the bustling activity along Congress Avenue. "The judge there, Judge Hammond, is a good man," he said. "Fair and honest. With your testimony and the evidence from the watch, we have a strong case against Holloway." "And after the trial," Penelope asked, "what happens then?" Luke was silent for a moment. "That depends on you. You could return to teaching. There are legitimate schools in Austin and San Antonio that would value your experience." The idea held little appeal for Penelope now. Her brief time as a teacher in Texas was overshadowed by Victor's deception, and the thought of starting over in yet another strange place was daunting. "I don't know if I can trust my judgment anymore," she admitted. "I was so wrong about Victor." "You trusted the wrong man once," Luke said quietly. "That doesn't mean you can't trust again." Their eyes met in the moonlight, and Penelope felt that same flutter in her chest. Was he speaking generally, or was there something more in his words? Before she could respond, Luke tensed, his hand moving to his gun. "Get down," he whispered urgently. They crouched behind a large boulder as voices drifted toward them on the night air. Through a gap in the rocks, they could see the glow of lanterns moving through the trees below the ridge. "They're still tracking us," Luke breathed, his lips close to her ear. "We need to change direction." They began moving north, away from their planned route, keeping low and using the rocks for cover. The voices gradually faded as Victor's men continued east, but Luke maintained their new course for nearly an hour before turning east again. "We'll have to make a wide circle," he explained. "It will add time to our journey, but it's safer." The detour took them through increasingly difficult terrain, steep hills, and dense thickets that tore at their clothes and scratched their skin. By midnight, Penelope was stumbling with exhaustion. "We need to rest," Luke decided, catching her arm as she nearly fell. "Just for a few hours." They found shelter beneath a large oak tree, its massive trunk providing some protection from the wind that had picked up. Luke sat with his back against the tree, rifle at his side, and after a moment's hesitation, he extended his arm. "Come here," he said softly. "You're shivering." Penelope moved closer, allowing him to wrap his arm around her shoulders and draw her against his side. His warmth enveloped her and she relaxed into his strength. "Sleep," he murmured. "I've got you." In the safety of his embrace, Penelope drifted into a light sleep, her head resting on his shoulder. She woke occasionally throughout the night, always to find Luke alert and watchful, his arms still protectively around her. Dawn found them moving again, more slowly now due to their exhaustion. They avoided open areas, staying within the cover of the forest whenever possible. Luke estimated they were still 2 days from Austin if they maintained their current pace. Around midday, they came upon a small homestead, a modest cabin with a vegetable garden and a few chickens pecking in the yard. An elderly couple sat on the porch, the man whittling wood while the woman shelled peas. "Should we ask for help?" Penelope whispered as they observed from the tree line. Luke considered it. "Risky. We don't know if Holloway has connections here. They look harmless enough." "So did Victor, according to you," Luke reminded her gently. Penelope winced at the truth in his words. "What do we do then?" Luke sighed, clearly weighing their options. "We're running low on water and we could use a real meal. I'll approach alone first. If anything seems off, I'll signal you to run." "I'm not leaving you," Penelope said firmly. Luke gave her a look that was equal parts exasperation and admiration. "Stubborn woman, I've been called worse." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wait here until I wave you forward. If I draw my gun for any reason, head back to those rocks we passed and hide." Penelope nodded reluctantly, watching with apprehension as Luke emerged from the trees and approached the cabin openly, his hands visible to show he meant no harm. The elderly couple looked up in surprise at his appearance. After a brief conversation, the man stood and offered his hand to Luke, who shook it with apparent relief. When Luke turned and waved to Penelope, she emerged cautiously from the tree line. The couple, who introduced themselves as Martha and Elijah Wilson, welcomed them warmly, asking no questions about their disheveled appearance or why they had emerged from the forest rather than using the road. "Any friend of the Rangers is welcome at our table," Martha declared, ushering them inside. The cabin was small but immaculately clean, with handmade quilts adorning the chairs and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, making Penelope's mouth water. "You two look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest," Martha observed, setting plates of stew and bread before them. Luke explained that they were traveling to Austin on ranger business, careful not to mention Victor Holloway or the real reason for their journey. Elijah nodded knowingly. "Dangerous work, being a ranger," he said. "Our son rode with the Rangers for 10 years before settling down to ranch near San Antonio." Over the meal, they learned that the Wilsons had lived on this homestead for nearly 30 years, having come west from Tennessee after the war. They were largely self-sufficient and had little contact with the larger towns in the area. "Not many visitors out this way," Elijah said, "except for the occasional traveler or ranger on patrol." As they ate, Penelope gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of a home-cooked meal and friendly conversation. Luke, too, seemed to unbend somewhat, though he remained alert, his eyes frequently moving to the windows. After the meal, Martha insisted they rest before continuing their journey. "You both look dead on your feet," she declared. "Elijah will keep watch, won't you, dear?" Her husband nodded. "Nothing gets past these old eyes. You two get some sleep." Martha showed them to a small loft accessible by a ladder. 2 narrow pallets had been prepared, separated by a hanging quilt for privacy. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's clean and dry. It's perfect," Penelope assured her. "Thank you for your kindness." Left alone, she and Luke stood awkwardly on either side of the hanging quilt. Despite their nights in the cabin and the hours spent pressed together as they fled through the forest, this arrangement felt strangely intimate. "You take the first rest," Luke said finally. "I'll keep watch for a while." "Luke," Penelope said softly, "you haven't slept in 2 days. Please rest." He hesitated, then nodded. "A few hours. Wake me if you hear anything unusual." They retired to their respective pallets, the quilt between them offering the illusion of privacy. Penelope listened to Luke's breathing gradually slow and deepen as exhaustion claimed him. Only when she was certain he was asleep did she allow herself to relax and close her eyes. She woke to Martha's gentle call from below, announcing that supper was ready. The light filtering through the small loft window had the golden quality of late afternoon. Luke was already awake, standing by the window and gazing out at the surrounding forest. "See anything?" Penelope asked, sitting up. He shook his head. "All quiet, but we should move on after supper. I don't want to put the Wilsons at risk any longer than necessary." They descended to find a simple but hearty meal laid out on the table. As they ate, Elijah mentioned that he needed to go into town the following day for supplies. "We could give you a ride part of the way," he offered. "My wagon's not fast, but it would be easier than walking." Luke exchanged a glance with Penelope. "That's very generous, but we wouldn't want to involve you in our troubles." Martha snorted. "Trouble already found you from the looks of it. And we're too old to worry about what others might think or do." After some discussion, they agreed to accept the ride. Elijah would take them as far as the main road to Austin, where they could continue on foot. It would save them at least half a day's journey. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Martha pressed a bundle of food into Penelope's hands. "For the road," she said kindly. "And this too." She handed Penelope a small knife in a leather sheath. A woman should always have protection. Penelope embraced the older woman, touched by her kindness. "Thank you for everything. You take care of each other," Martha said, her eyes moving between Penelope and Luke with knowing sympathy. "Some things are worth fighting for." The wagon ride was slower than traveling on horseback would have been, but infinitely more comfortable than walking. Penelope and Luke sat in the back, partially hidden beneath a tarp Elijah had arranged to keep off the sun, though they all knew it was really to conceal them from prying eyes. They traveled for several hours, the rhythmic creaking of the wagon wheels lulling Penelope into a state of drowsy contentment. Despite the danger still pursuing them, she felt a strange peace in that moment, sitting beside Luke in the dappled shade of the tarp, their shoulders touching with each bump in the road. "Thank you," she said softly. Luke turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. "For everything," she clarified, "for believing me, for helping me, for risking your life for a stranger." His expression softened. "You're not a stranger anymore, Penny." The way he said her name with a gentleness few would expect from the taciturn ranger made her heart skip. She found herself studying his face, noticing details she had missed before. The small scar above his right eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he had once smiled more often, the fullness of his lower lip. "No," she agreed. "I suppose we're not strangers after all." Something in her tone made Luke's eyes darken, and for a breathless moment Penelope thought he might kiss her. But the wagon hit a particularly deep rut, jostling them apart, and the moment passed. By mid-afternoon, they reached the main road to Austin. Elijah stopped the wagon in a shaded area where a small creek crossed beneath the road. "This is as far as I go," he said. "Austin's about a day's walk that way." He pointed east. "Stay on the main road, it's well-traveled, safer than cutting through the wilderness." Luke shook the older man's hand. "We can't thank you enough." "No need," Elijah said gruffly. "Just doing what's right. You two be careful now." They watched as the wagon disappeared back down the road, then turned toward Austin. The main road was indeed busier than the forest paths they had been following, with occasional wagons and riders passing by. Luke kept his hat pulled low and instructed Penelope to do the same with the bonnet Martha had given her. "We look like any other travelers now," he said approvingly. "As long as no one looks too closely." They walked steadily through the afternoon, making good time on the relatively flat road. As sunset approached, they began looking for a place to camp for the night. Just off the road, they found a small clearing near the creek that offered some privacy while still allowing them to see approaching travelers. Luke built a small fire while Penelope unpacked the food Martha had provided: bread, cheese, dried meat, and even a few apples. They ate in companionable silence, watching the flames dance in the gathering darkness. "We should reach Austin by tomorrow evening," Luke said finally. "Judge Hammond will want to hear your testimony immediately." "And then what?" Penelope asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on her mind. Luke poked at the fire with a stick. "Then we wait for Holloway to be captured and brought to trial. You'll need to stay somewhere safe in the meantime." "With you?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. Luke looked up, surprised. In the firelight, his eyes appeared almost golden. That wouldn't be proper, Penny. Proper." She gave a soft laugh. "We've been alone together for days. We've slept under the same roof. You've seen me in your shirt. I think propriety is the least of our concerns." "That was different," Luke insisted. "We were in danger, running for our lives. And now, he hesitated. Now we're back in civilization. There are expectations, rules." Penelope moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Do you always follow the rules, Ranger Donovan?" Luke's breath caught audibly. "Penny." "I almost died," she said quietly. "Victor would have killed me if not for you. Life is too short for regrets, don't you think?" For a moment, Luke remained perfectly still. Then slowly he reached up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers impossibly gentle against her skin. "I've been fighting this since the moment I saw you in that crowd," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion, "trying to be professional, to remember my duty. And now," Penelope whispered, "now I'm tired of fighting." His hand slid to the nape of her neck, drawing her closer. "Tell me to stop, Penny." Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a demand. But when Luke's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest, the last of Penelope's hesitation melted away. She sank into the kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, his neck, his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Luke rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if in pain. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "You've been through so much. You're vulnerable." Penelope pulled back to look at him properly. "Do I seem vulnerable to you?" she challenged. "I've survived Victor's betrayal, a gunshot wound, and days of being hunted. I know my own mind, Luke Donovan, and I know what I want." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "And what is that, Miss Crawford?" "You," she said simply. "I want you." The raw honesty in her voice seemed to break something in Luke. With a groan, he pulled her back into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent this time. Penelope responded with equal fervor, all the fear and tension of the past days transforming into a desperate need for connection. When they separated again, Luke's expression was serious. "Penny, if we survive this, when we survive this, I want to do things properly, court you the way you deserve." Penelope couldn't help but laugh. "Are you asking permission to call on me, Ranger?" "I suppose I am," he admitted, a sheepish smile lighting his face. "It's been a while since I've done this." "Then yes," she said, touching his cheek gently. "When this is over, I would very much like you to call on me, Luke Donovan." They slept that night curled together beside the fire, Luke's arm protectively around Penelope's waist, her head tucked beneath his chin. Despite the hard ground and the lingering threat of pursuit, Penelope slept more peacefully than she had in weeks, lulled by the steady rhythm of Luke's heartbeat against her back. Morning brought renewed determination to reach Austin. They set out at dawn, walking briskly along the road, which grew busier as they neared the city. By mid-afternoon, they could see the distant outlines of buildings rising from the plains. "Almost there," Luke encouraged as they paused to rest. "Just a few more miles." Penelope nodded, too tired for words. The emotional and physical toll of their journey was catching up to her, and each step required more effort than the last. Only the thought of safety and the possibility of a future with Luke kept her moving forward. As they approached the outskirts of Austin, Luke became more vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Holloway has contacts in every major town," he explained. We need to be careful until we reach Judge Hammond. They entered the city as evening fell, the streets busy with people heading home for the day or out for entertainment. Penelope felt conspicuous in her dirty, torn dress, but most passers-by were too preoccupied with their own affairs to pay them much attention. Luke led her through the streets with confidence, clearly familiar with the city's layout. They approached a large, imposing building that Penelope recognized as a courthouse. "The judge often works late," Luke explained. "With luck, he'll still be here." Inside, the building was quiet, most offices dark and empty. But light shone from beneath one door at the end of a long corridor. Luke knocked firmly. "Enter," called a deep voice. Judge Hammond was a tall, lean man with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked up from a stack of papers as they entered, his expression changing from irritation to surprise as he recognized Luke. "Donovan, we thought you might be dead. There are reports of a shootout at your cabin. Not dead, Your Honor, just delayed." Luke quickly introduced Penelope and explained the situation, including Victor's crimes and the evidence in the gold watch. The judge listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. When Luke finished, Hammond turned to Penelope. "Miss Crawford, are you willing to testify to all this in court?" "Yes, Your Honor," she replied firmly. "I want to see Victor Holloway brought to justice." Hammond nodded approvingly. "Brave woman, we'll need to keep you safe until the trial." He looked at Luke. "I assume you have a plan for that. I was hoping for some official assistance, sir. Holloway's men are still hunting us." The judge considered this. "I have a house outside the city, my late wife's family property. It's secluded with good sight lines. No one would think to look for you there." He reached into a drawer and withdrew a key. "Take Miss Crawford there tonight. I'll send deputies in the morning to provide additional security." Luke accepted the key with evident relief. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet, Donovan. Holloway has friends in high places." "This won't be easy." The judge's eyes moved between Luke and Penelope, noting their closeness. "I trust you'll remember your duty as an officer of the law." Luke straightened. "Always, sir." A ghost of a smile touched the judge's lips. "See that you do. Now go before anyone notices you're here." Outside, night had fallen completely. Luke hired a carriage to take them to the judge's property, reasoning that they would attract less attention that way than on foot. As they rode through the darkened streets, Penelope leaned against Luke's shoulder, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "Almost safe," he murmured, his arm around her. "Just hold on a little longer." The judge's house was a handsome two-story structure set amid several acres of land about 5 miles outside the city. The driver let them off at the gate, and Luke guided Penelope up the long drive to the house. Inside, it was dusty but well-maintained, with sheet-covered furniture and a fully stocked pantry. Luke lit lamps in the main rooms while Penelope explored, finding clean linens in a cupboard and a pump in the kitchen that provided fresh water. "The judge must have servants come regularly," Luke observed. "Everything's ready for use." Penelope filled a basin with water and began washing the dust of travel from her face and hands. "What happens tomorrow? The deputies will arrive to provide security. The judge will send word to Ranger headquarters about Holloway, and they'll organize a proper search." Luke checked the locks on the doors and windows as he spoke. "You'll be safe here until he's captured. And you?" Penelope asked, watching him. "Will you stay?" Luke paused in his security check. "I should join the search for Holloway. It's my duty." "Your duty," she repeated, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. He crossed the room to stand before her, taking her hands in his. "Penny, nothing would make me happier than to stay with you. But as long as Holloway is free, you're in danger. I need to help end this threat." Penelope understood the logic, but her heart rebelled at the thought of Luke riding into danger without her. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And I promise to come back to you." The simple gesture and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "I'll hold you to that, Ranger Donovan." They found food in the pantry and prepared a simple meal, eating at the kitchen table by lamplight. Afterward, Luke insisted on taking the first watch while Penelope rested. Despite her protests that they were safe now, he was adamant. Old habits, he explained with a small smile. I'll feel better knowing someone's keeping watch, at least until the deputies arrive tomorrow. Too tired to argue further, Penelope retired to one of the upstairs bedrooms. After washing as best she could with the limited water, she slipped between clean sheets for the first time in days. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. The bed felt too large, too empty without Luke's presence nearby. After tossing and turning for an hour, she rose and went downstairs. She found Luke sitting in a chair by the window, his rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "No." She moved to stand beside him. "Too quiet, I think. I've grown used to hearing you breathe." Luke looked up at her then, his expression softening. "You should try to rest, Penny. Tomorrow will be a long day." "I know." She hesitated, then added, "Come with me." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Penny, just to sleep," she clarified, though part of her wanted more. "I'd feel safer with you nearby." Luke appeared to struggle with himself for a moment before nodding. "Let me check the house once more." Upstairs, they lay side by side on the large bed, a respectful distance between them despite their earlier intimacy by the campfire. Luke had removed his boots and gun belt, but remained otherwise fully clothed, as did Penelope. "Is this proper enough for you, Ranger?" She teased gently, turning on her side to face him. In the dim light from the single candle, she saw his lips quirk in a smile. "Not remotely, but I find I care less about propriety with each passing day." He reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. "Get some sleep, Penny. I'll be here when you wake up." Secure in that promise, Penelope closed her eyes and finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. Morning brought the promised deputies, 4 grim-faced men who took up positions around the property with professional efficiency. They brought news that a ranger company had been dispatched to search for Victor Holloway, using the information from Luke's report. "Captain wants you to join them, Donovan," the lead deputy informed Luke. "Says you know Holloway's patterns better than anyone." Luke nodded, though Penelope could see the reluctance in his eyes. "When do I leave?" "As soon as you're ready. They're gathering at Ranger headquarters in the city." While Luke prepared to depart, Penelope tried to appear brave, helping him pack provisions and check his weapons. But as the moment of separation drew near, her composure began to crack. "It's not too late to change your mind," she said as they stood on the porch. "The other Rangers could find him without you." Luke cupped her face in his hands. "I need to see this through, Penny, for both our sakes. We'll never be truly free until Holloway is behind bars." She knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier to watch him mount his horse provided by one of the deputies and prepare to ride away. "Luke," she called as he gathered the reins, "remember your promise." He looked back at her, his expression intense. "I remember. Wait for me, Penny." "Always," she replied, forcing a smile. As he rode away, Penelope felt as though a part of her went with him. The deputies assured her of her safety, but without Luke, the house felt empty and cold despite the warm spring day. The days that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Penelope busied herself cleaning the long, empty house, reading books from the judge's library, and attempting to mend her tattered dress. Judge Hammond visited once, bringing her a trunk of clothing that had belonged to his late wife. "She was about your size," he explained gruffly. "No use letting these go to waste." Penelope thanked him sincerely, touched by the thoughtful gesture. The clothes were somewhat outdated but well made and in good condition, far better than the single dress she had been wearing for days. "Any news of Ranger Donovan?" she asked as the judge prepared to leave. Hammond's expression was carefully neutral. "The Rangers have tracked Holloway to his ranch. They're planning a raid." Penelope's stomach clenched with fear. "Is it dangerous?" "Holloway is a desperate man," the judge replied, which was answer enough. "But Donovan is one of our best. Try not to worry too much, Miss Crawford." But worry she did, especially as one day stretched into 3 with no word from Luke or about the raid. She took to pacing the porch in the evenings, watching the road for any sign of a rider, until the deputies gently suggested she might be safer inside. On the 4th day, as Penelope sat in the parlor attempting to focus on a book, she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Heart racing, she rushed to the window, praying it would be Luke. Instead, she saw Judge Hammond dismounting from his horse, his expression grave. One of the deputies met him at the gate, and they spoke briefly before the judge continued up the path to the house. Penelope opened the door before he could knock, her face pale with dread. "What's happened? Is it Luke?" Hammond removed his hat. "May I come in, Miss Crawford? I have news." Those words, so formal, so careful, sent ice through her veins. She stepped back mechanically, allowing him to enter. In the parlor, she sank onto a chair, steeling herself for the worst. "There was a confrontation at Holloway's ranch," the judge began. "Shots were fired, several men were wounded. Luke." The name was barely a whisper. Hammond's expression softened slightly. "Donovan was hit, but his wounds are not life-threatening. He's at the hospital in Austin." Relief made Penelope dizzy. "He's alive. Thank God. There's more," Hammond continued. "Victor Holloway was killed in the shootout. His men have either been captured or scattered." "The threat is over, Miss Crawford. You're safe now." The news should have brought joy, but all Penelope could think about was Luke, wounded and alone in a hospital bed. "I need to see him. Of course, I've brought a carriage. The deputies will escort us back to the city." The ride to Austin seemed endless, though in reality it took less than an hour. Judge Hammond spoke little, allowing Penelope time to process the news and compose herself. When they finally reached the small hospital on the outskirts of town, Penelope barely waited for the carriage to stop before descending, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. A nurse directed them to a ward at the end of a long corridor. Inside, several beds were occupied by injured men, most sleeping or talking quietly with visitors. Penelope scanned the room anxiously until her eyes fell on a familiar figure in the far corner. Luke was propped up against pillows, his left shoulder and arm heavily bandaged. His face was pale, with dark shadows beneath his eyes speaking of pain and exhaustion. But he was alive, and when he saw her, his expression transformed with a joy that made her heart skip. "Penny," he breathed as she rushed to his bedside. Mindful of his injuries, she took his right hand in both of hers, fighting back tears. "You scared me half to death, Ranger Donovan." A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "I seem to recall making a promise to return to you. I keep my promises." "Yes, you do." Unable to contain her emotions any longer, Penelope leaned forward and kissed him gently. When she pulled back, Luke's eyes were soft with an emotion she had been afraid to name until now. "I love you, Penelope Crawford. I think I have since the moment you tried to disappear in that crowd." "And I love you, Luke Donovan," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "Even when you're being stubborn and noble and nearly getting yourself killed." He laughed, then winced as the movement jarred his injured shoulder. "The doctor says I'll make a full recovery. But I'll be on medical leave for a few months." "Good," Penelope said firmly. "That will give you plenty of time to court me properly, as you promised." Luke's expression grew serious. "About that, I've been thinking. Medical leave or not, my job as a ranger will always involve danger. It's not fair to ask you to live with that fear." Penelope's heart sank. "Are you saying you don't want to court me after all?" "No," he said quickly. "I'm saying I don't want to court you as a ranger." He took a deep breath. "Judge Hammond offered me a position as a deputy marshal here in Austin. Less dangerous, more regular hours. I'm considering accepting." Hope bloomed in Penelope's chest. "Because of me, because of us," Luke corrected. "Because I've spent 8 years chasing justice for my sister's memory, and I think it's time I started living for my own future." His hand tightened around hers. "A future I hope will include you if you'll have me." "Luke Donovan," Penelope said, her voice thick with emotion, "are you proposing to me from a hospital bed?" He had the grace to look sheepish. "Not officially." "When I propose properly, There will be a ring and I'll be on one knee, not flat on my back with a bullet hole in my shoulder." His expression grew earnest. "But I wanted you to know my intentions. I love you, Penny. I want to build a life with you." Penelope leaned forward to kiss him again, pouring all her love and relief into the gesture. "Then yes, Ranger, or should I say Deputy Marshal, I accept your not-quite proposal, and I look forward to the official one when you're healed." Judge Hammond, who had been standing discreetly nearby, cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt this touching scene, but there are matters we need to discuss, Miss Crawford. Your testimony will still be needed for the trial of Holloway's men." Luke's arm tightened protectively around Penelope's waist. "She'll be ready, Your Honor, but first she needs rest and time to recover from her ordeal." The judge nodded, a rare smile softening his stern features. "Of course, the trials won't begin for several weeks. In the meantime, Miss Crawford is welcome to continue staying at my property." His eyes moved meaningfully between them, with proper chaperonage, naturally. Penelope felt her cheeks warm but met the judge's gaze steadily. "Thank you, Your Honor. Your kindness has been a blessing." After the judge departed, Penelope settled more comfortably beside Luke's bed, unwilling to leave his side despite the nurse's pointed looks. Luke watched her with a contentment that belied his injuries. "When I saw you trying to fade into that crowd in Sweetwater," he said softly, "I had no idea you would end up changing my life." "Nor I yours," Penelope replied, squeezing his hand. "It seems we saved each other." 3 months later, on a perfect summer evening, Penelope stood in the garden of Judge Hammond's house, now her home until the wedding. Luke knelt before her, fully recovered from his wounds and resplendent in his new deputy marshal's uniform, a small velvet box in his hand. "Penelope Crawford," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "when I found you in that crowd, I was looking for a witness, a means to an end in my pursuit of justice. Instead, I found the other half of my soul." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in Texas?" "Yes," Penelope whispered, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, with all my heart." As Luke slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to take her in his arms, Penelope marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From terror and flight to love and promise, from a woman trying to fade into the background to one standing proudly in the light. "Not to me, you don't," Luke had said when he first found her, refusing to let her disappear. Now, safe in his embrace with their future stretching bright before them, Penelope knew she would never want to fade away again. Their wedding took place that autumn, a simple but joyful ceremony in Austin's small church. Judge Hammond gave the bride away, and several of Luke's fellow Rangers stood as groomsmen. Martha and Elijah Wilson made the journey from their homestead to attend, Martha fussing over Penelope like a mother hen, and Elijah engaging Luke in long conversations about the best places to fish in the area. As they exchanged vows, Penelope wore a gown made from silk that Luke had ordered specially from San Antonio, and around her neck hung a delicate gold locket, Luke's wedding gift, inscribed with the words, "Not to me, you don't," on the inside. After the ceremony, they moved into a small but comfortable house on the outskirts of Austin, close enough for Luke to ride to work each day as deputy marshal, but with enough land around it to give them privacy and room to grow. And grow they did. Within a year, Penelope gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Luke's sister. 2 years later, a son joined their family, named Michael in honor of Miguel, whose sacrifice had given Penelope the chance to escape Victor's ranch. Penelope found her calling teaching at Austin's growing school, her experiences giving her particular empathy for children who struggled or felt out of place. Luke thrived in his role as deputy marshal, his fairness and integrity earning him the respect of the community. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Luke took Penelope's hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, just as he had done the night they first arrived at Judge Hammond's house. happy?" He asked, his hazel eyes still capable of making her heart race after all these years. Penelope leaned against his shoulder, watching as Sarah helped her little brother chase butterflies through the tall grass. "Completely. You, more than I ever thought possible." Luke's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I was to spot you in that crowd." "It wasn't luck," Penelope said softly. "It was destiny." As the Texas sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they remained on the porch, content in the life they had built together, a life that began with a desperate woman trying to fade into a crowd and a determined ranger who refused to let her disappear.